There's a substance that Irish golf course superintendents have used on tournament greens for over a century. There's a substance that Victorian estate gardeners stockpiled by the barrel. There's a substance that traces its origin directly to the blacksmith shops of medieval Europe. And there's a substance that costs less than 50 cents a pound to buy, kills moss within 24 hours, and greens grass to a shade darker than any American lawn fertilizer can produce. It is the same substance, and you cannot find it stocked at any major American garden center. It's called Blacksmith's byproduct. By the end, you'll know why. Let's dive in. Right now, the average American homeowner spends between $400 and $700 a year on professional lawn care services. That is chemical fertilizer applications, broadleaf weed control, grub treatments, moss killer, and pH correction, all delivered by a licensed applicator in a marked truck. And if you have looked at the shelves at your local hardware store recently, you already know the retail alternatives are not much cheaper. A single 5-pound bag of synthetic iron chelate greening fertilizer runs between $28 and $45. A gallon of concentrated moss killer costs $22 to $38. A season's worth of weed and feed treatments for a modest quarter-acre lawn adds up to over $200 in chemical purchases alone. The engineered products every big box store pushes as premium lawn care, professional-grade turf fertilizers with proprietary iron blends. Cost between $60 and $120 per bag. And here's the part nobody puts in the marketing brochure. Modern synthetic iron chelates are engineered to work fast, but they leach out of soil within 4 to 8 weeks. That means you're reapplying the same product 6 to 8 times per growing season. When the season ends, you buy new bags at full retail. That is not lawn care. That is a subscription plan poured out of a plastic jug. And the modern lawn chemical industry itself is not exactly getting more honest. American homeowners collectively pour over 90 million pounds of synthetic herbicides onto residential lawns every year, according to EPA figures. Glyphosate, 2,4-D, dicamba. Every one of those chemicals is manufactured in an industrial facility, shipped in warning-labeled containers, and applied under EPA-mandated safety instructions. You are paying more than ever for materials that require protective equipment to handle safely, while your grass performs no better than lawns cared for with materials your great-grandfather could buy at the village general store for pennies. And when you see what it costs to source and apply a proper iron-based lawn treatment, you will understand why no major lawn care company has ever advertised one. The blacksmith shops of every civilization on Earth have been producing this substance since before your grandfather was born. It does not degrade in storage, it does not require a warning label under normal use, and it does not care whether a dry summer hits in July or a wet spring hits in April. But the real question is not whether iron sulfate works. The horticultural data on that was settled over 150 years ago. The real question is what happens when you spread the same crystalline waste product across your yard. That Irish greenskeepers have been spreading for a century. And that is where this material stops being a curiosity and starts being a threat to a $105 billion industry. But to see why, you need to understand the chemistry. Because once you see how simple the mechanism actually is, you will never look at a bag of synthetic weed and feed the same way again. Iron sulfate is a chemical compound. That name sounds like a laboratory product, but the principle is one you already know. If you have ever noticed rust flaking off an old iron tool that got wet, you have seen the first half of the reaction. Iron reacts with oxygen and water to form iron oxides. In a blacksmith shop, that reaction is amplified. When red-hot iron hits the quench barrel, the surface flakes off in a dark crystalline scale. When sulfur-bearing coal is used as forge fuel, that scale combines with sulfate ions to form ferrous sulfate crystals. The apprentice sweeps the shop floor. The crystals collect in a corner. The blacksmith either dumps the pile out back or sells it to a farmer for a few pennies. That crystalline waste is one of the most bioavailable forms of iron ever documented for plant uptake. Here's what happens when iron sulfate hits grass. The compound dissolves readily in water. When rainfall or irrigation carries it into the leaf blade, the sulfate ion drops away, and the iron ion enters plant tissue directly. Grass uses iron to construct chlorophyll supporting enzymes. When iron is plentiful, chlorophyll production accelerates. The blade turns a deeper, more saturated green within hours. Moss, on the other hand, cannot tolerate the same concentration. Moss cell walls rupture in response to the localized iron surge. The moss blackens, dries, and dies within 24 to 48 hours. Broadleaf weeds like clover, dandelion, and buttercup experience similar cellular damage, while turfgrass, which has evolved iron-tolerant leaf chemistry, thrives. A single application of iron sulfate at a rate of 5 to 10 grams per square meter, dissolved in water and applied through a garden sprayer or spreader, will kill visible moss within 48 hours and produce visible grass greening within 12 hours. That is not enough to permanently prevent moss from returning. But here is where the practical science starts. When you address the underlying soil deficiency that allowed moss to establish in the first place, meaning low iron and low pH, moss returns very slowly. A twice-a-season application of iron sulfate maintains moss-free, deep green turf for less than $10 in materials annually. That is enough to service an entire quarter-acre residential lawn. That is enough to replace $400 in professional treatments. That is enough to eliminate every synthetic herbicide, moss killer, and iron chelate from your garage shelf, and none of it requires a licensed applicator, a warning label, or an EPA registration number. That fact alone tells you why you have never been told about it at a big box store. And unlike modern synthetic chelates, iron sulfate does not require refrigerated storage or careful moisture control. The dry crystalline form remains stable in a sealed container for years. A single bag purchased today will treat your lawn for 4 to 6 full seasons. In a region with normal rainfall, that means your lawn treatment cost drops to roughly $2 per year. Now, there is a second reason this material was quietly buried, and most people have never heard of it. During the American colonial period, the substance had a specific name in every general store from Boston to Charleston. It was called copperas. American farmers bought copperas by the barrel to spread on pastures, fields, and household lawns. It appeared in every major American farming manual published between 1800 and 1940. James Vick's Illustrated Monthly Magazine, the leading American gardening publication of the late 1800s, published detailed articles on copperas' application for lawn moss control. The 1901 edition of the Farmer's Cyclopedia of Livestock, produced by the United States of Agriculture, listed copperas as standard treatment for moss and iron deficiency in pastures. That is not folklore. That is documented American agricultural science, still preserved in library archives at Cornell, the University of Wisconsin, and the National Agricultural Library. But if you think this history begins with American farmers, you are off by several thousand years. In the 1st century CE, the Roman naturalist Pliny the Elder documented the use of a substance he called mesi in Book 34 of his Naturalis Historia. He described it as a yellow-green crystalline material collected from the residue of ironworking used by Roman farmers to treat pastures and vineyards. Modern chemists and classical historians at the University of Naples have confirmed that mesi is chemically identical to ferrous sulfate. That means Roman agriculture was already using Blacksmith's byproduct as a soil amendment 2,000 years ago. In medieval Europe, the same substance was known by dozens of regional names. English texts called it green vitriol. German writings referred to it as Eisenvitriol. French agricultural manuals from the 1500s described its use in vineyards under the name Cuperos verte. Every literate agricultural culture in the temperate world had a specific word for the substance and specific instructions for spreading it on fields. By the 1800s, nearly every major agricultural nation on the planet was using ferrous sulfate as a routine soil amendment. British estates used it on golf courses and cricket grounds. Irish farms used it on pastures. German viticulturists used it in the Rhineland. French wine country used it in Burgundy and Bordeaux. The forests and fields of the temperate world were already being fed Blacksmith's byproduct. It just never got the credit in a modern hardware store. But the Romans were not even close to the first civilization to identify iron sulfate as a soil treatment. Recent archaeological excavations at ancient Chinese metallurgical sites in Henan province, dating to the Han dynasty around 200 BCE, have documented the deliberate collection of forge scale for agricultural use. Chinese texts from the 3rd century CE describe the substance under the name Lu Fan, meaning green alum, and specify its use in restoring vigor to depleted soils. Chinese materials scientists at Zhejiang University have confirmed the compound and its efficacy in modern laboratory conditions. This is not fringe archaeology. It is one of the earliest documented cases of agricultural chemistry in human history. You can replicate that same treatment in your own yard using iron sulfate available from any farm supply store or online retailer. And yet, almost none of this appears in any modern American lawn care conversation today. Now, fast forward to the moment when iron sulfate was quietly written out of the American residential market. In the years immediately following World War II, the American chemical industry pivoted from producing wartime nitrogen compounds to civilian herbicides. The synthesis of 2-Comefor-D in 1945 created the first commercial selective broadleaf herbicide. The introduction of atrazine in 1958 followed. Between 1946 and 1965, the American residential lawn care market was completely transformed. Chemical companies including Monsanto, Dow, Union Carbide, and DuPont invested unprecedented sums in television advertising, magazine campaigns, and homeowner education programs, promoting synthetic herbicides and fertilizers. Copperas, which could not be patented, packaged in proprietary formulations, or protected under trademark law, was quietly abandoned by the mass market. It was not banned. It was not disproven. It was simply replaced by materials that could support a national advertising budget and a licensed applicator business model. Now, if you were thinking this transition would have preserved iron sulfate somewhere in the professional turfgrass industry, you would be exactly right. Golf course superintendents in Ireland, Scotland, and England never abandoned it. Cricket ground managers continued using it. American professional turfgrass programs at institutions like Penn State, Michigan State, and North Carolina State published detailed research on iron sulfate application through the 1970s and 1980s. It remained standard practice on high-end golf courses in the United States. But the residential market, dominated by chemical company advertising, moved almost entirely to synthetic products. Modern testing has repeatedly confirmed what pre-1946 farmers already knew. In a series of studies published by the Alaska Cooperative Extension Service through the University of Alaska Fairbanks, researchers documented iron sulfate as one of the most effective moss control treatments available for northern lawns. The data is public. It is peer-reviewed. It is available at no cost through the University Extension website. The University of Maryland. Extension has published similar findings, listing iron-based herbicides among the most environmentally safe options for residential broadleaf weed control. Rutgers University's turfgrass program has documented iron sulfate application rates and timing for optimal moss suppression in the mid-Atlantic climate. Every one of these publications sits behind a search bar that residential homeowners never think to use. Separately, at the Sports Turf Research Institute in Bingley, England, researchers have been documenting iron sulfate application on professional sports turf for over 70 years. Their material property data confirms that ferrous sulfate delivers grass greening effects that exceed most synthetic iron products, at a fraction of the cost, with no adverse environmental persistence. And in Ireland, where the substance is still standard practice on nearly every championship golf course, applied doses of 3 to 5 grams per square meter reliably produce tournament-grade greens without a single synthetic herbicide. Every one of these examples is documented, published, and verifiable, and yet the total number of American big-box garden center displays featuring iron sulfate as a primary lawn care product remains effectively zero. So if this material predates modern lawn chemistry by thousands of years and was confirmed by every major American land-grant university in the 20th century, why isn't it in a single suburban lawn care aisle? Because the system was never designed to accommodate something you can scoop from a 50-pound bag purchased for the price of dinner. The modern American residential lawn care market runs on branded products with recognizable trademarks, standardized formulations, licensed distribution channels, and repeat purchase business models. Iron sulfate is not on that list, not because it fails, because no major chemical manufacturer can differentiate a generic iron compound from a competitor's generic iron compound. There is no marketing budget in commodity chemistry. There is no premium price point in a substance that has existed as industrial waste for 3,000 years. There is no way to build a proprietary product moat around a compound that any chemistry student can identify from a textbook. Without brand differentiation, there is no advertising budget. Without advertising budget, there is no shelf placement. Without shelf placement, there is no consumer awareness. This is not a ban. It is something more effective than a ban. It is structural invisibility. The American residential lawn care market generates over $105 billion a year in revenue. That revenue depends on branded chemical products, patent-protected formulations, licensed applicators, and the seasonal repeat purchase cycle that comes when synthetic products leach out of soil in 6 to 8 weeks. Every dollar that flows through that system passes through equipment and formulations that someone owns, maintains, and invoices for. A 50-pound bag of ferrous sulfate generates no royalty. It requires no proprietary applicator equipment. It supports no licensed service contract. It creates no recurring revenue stream for any party at any point in the supply chain. From the perspective of the modern lawn care economy, iron sulfate is not a competitor. It is a non-entity. It does not fit into the financial architecture, and therefore it does not exist within the regulatory architecture. No one conspired to suppress it. The frameworks that govern American residential horticulture were simply written for products that scale. Products that can be trademarked, packaged in proprietary containers, protected under patent law, and financed through approved distribution channels. A crystalline waste product swept from an industrial floor for 2,000 years does not clear a single one of those gates. And so it vanishes. Not suppressed, just never seen. Now, if you are thinking iron sulfate might be too crude to matter in your life, stop and consider what you actually need to keep a lawn healthy. You need to kill moss. You need to suppress broadleaf weeds. You need to correct iron deficiency in yellowing turf grass. You need a treatment that costs less than a professional service call. You need something you can apply yourself with a hand spreader or a garden sprayer. Iron sulfate meets every one of those requirements. None of them require a $400 professional lawn care contract. All of them can be served by a material that costs less than a dinner for two. If you want to start reducing your lawn care costs today, we put together a full manual that covers everything in this video and more. The link is in the description below. Here is how the sourcing works. You need 3 things. First, the right product. Iron sulfate is sold under several names. Ferrous sulfate heptahydrate. sulfate of iron. Copperas, green vitriol. It is available at farm supply stores, agricultural chemical dealers, and online through general purpose retailers. A 50-pound bag typically costs between $18 and $30, treating an average residential lawn for 4 to 6 full growing seasons. Second, the application equipment. A standard garden pump sprayer will work for liquid application. A broadcast spreader will work for granular application. If you already own either from previous lawn work, no additional equipment is needed. Third, timing and dosage. For moss control, apply at a rate of 5 to 10 grams per square meter. Dissolve in water at a ratio of roughly 20 grams per liter for a spray application. Apply in the cool part of the morning or early evening to reduce leaf burn risk. Water lightly after application to move the material into the soil. Total cost for a full season of iron sulfate lawn treatment on a quarter-acre residential lawn comes in under $10 in materials at current U.S. retail prices. Compare that to $400 to $700 for a comparable professional treatment program. That is not a discount. That is a different economic universe. One critical warning. Iron sulfate stains concrete, brick, stone, and unsealed masonry a rust orange color that is nearly impossible to remove. Do not apply it on windy days near hard surfaces. Sweep any spilled granules off driveways and sidewalks immediately. Do not track wet residue into your house on shoes. Wear gloves and eye protection during application. The compound is not toxic to humans or pets in normal handling, but is irritating to skin and eyes on prolonged contact. There are real limits, and you should know them. Iron sulfate is not a permanent moss cure. If the underlying soil conditions that allowed moss to establish, meaning low iron, low pH, poor drainage, or excessive shade, are not addressed, moss will return within 1 to 2 seasons. Iron sulfate treats the symptom. Long-term lawn health requires attention to the underlying cause. Follow published rates. Do not exceed twice per season application without soil testing. The Blacksmith's byproduct is a 2,000-year-old answer to a question the modern lawn care industry was never designed to ask. It does not replace all aspects of proper lawn management or compete with premium services for chemical variety. But for the cost of 2 cups of coffee, it gives you a moss killer, a grass greener, and an iron corrective that outperforms most retail products. Using the same chemistry that Roman farmers, medieval European vineyard managers, and Irish golf course superintendents have relied on for thousands of years. A lot of what this channel covers was nearly lost, not because it stopped working, but because the system was never designed to accommodate something that does not generate a monthly invoice. If discovering the lost science of low-cost, self-sufficient property care matters to you, subscribing and sharing is the simplest way to make sure this kind of knowledge keeps being found. If you had a $20 bag of Blacksmith's byproduct and a garden sprayer, would you treat your entire lawn for a full season for the cost of a dinner? Or would you still hire a licensed applicator and pay $400 for a chemical program that delivers the same result? I would genuinely like to know. Drop it in the comments.